Welcome to the apiary. This is Jake B-Man with Golden Fox Farms. It is finally the right weather to do oxalic and place solid feed on hives. We are in the first week of December, running about 2 weeks later on the calendar than usual. The colonies are broodless, and it is cold enough for solid feeds, so we're blasting through hives on this mild day. We don't always get to do both of these on the same trip. We're mainly going to focus on solid feed in this video. We have another video that focuses on oxalic acid. Go there for that information. For solid feeding, you want temps reliably below clustering temperatures, 55 Fahrenheit. Otherwise, the girls take it out the front door as trash. This small yard here is an incipient yard, my first year having bees at this location. I primarily stock new yards with cast swarms, so if things go haywire, I mount some relatively low-cost colonies. Swarm colonies left to their own devices can end up a bit light for winter. Two of the colonies here need dry feed. Beyond swarm colonies, the other time I encounter hives that need dry feed are hives that had a robbing event nearby. In one of my other apiaries, I had a double nuke collapse that was robbed out. The 3 hives out of 30 in that yard that needed dry feed were the ones immediately around the lost colony. Now, I primarily use mountain camp feeding because it is super fast and convenient. You need a piece of newspaper and a shim to do this. You take the newspaper and you put it over the colony. It's a rather windy day that I was working here, but you can pin that down with the shim while you're working. Jab a couple holes in it with your hive tool and then place the sugar right on top of it. This sugar will harden up with the moisture that comes up from the hive below. I'll even pop a little hole in that corner there, let the bees above that get back down to the cluster. Now you do want to make sure you remove the newspaper that sticks off the sides with this, because that newspaper will act like a wick and direct water into the hive afterwards. Now this does make the hive relatively uninspectable. You have a mess to take off in the spring, but I'm feeding a minority of my colonies, so that isn't much of a drawback. Now, I was definitely hurrying while doing these. I had a lot to do, so I managed to put the shim on upside down and forget to slash the paper. I just drove my hive tool through afterwards to make those holes. That'll work fine. And the shim being upside down really doesn't impact the function of this at all. Those handles won't hold water, and I'm not going to drive back there just to turn it the right way around. The big thing for me is I am not investing much time into making sugar boards before knowing how many I will need. Now, this is my first year using fondant after hearing some great reviews. We will see how the bees perform with it. The instructions say to cut a window into the packaging and place it above the inner cover. This hive barely had enough room to fit it above the inner cover. In general, you're going to need a shim to fit it. I was surprised to find myself low on shims this year. I think I hit a stack for myself in my storage shed. And with that, we wrap up the minimal amount of feeding in this little yard, and I'm going to go on with oxalicing these hives, but there is more to talk about with feeding. Lots of people place dry feeds on colonies prophylactically, insurance feeding. I'm of the opinion it should be reserved just for light hives in need of feed, both for cost and convenience reasons. These solid feeds greatly complicate and limit future inspections. But also, I have concerns about the bees and how they deal with solid feeds. We usually think of insects as suction feeders, and bees can and do suction feed with lighter nectars. But bees are primarily lapping feeders, sticking their tongue into the viscous nectar or honey to gather it. These are two very different functions performed by the same mouthparts. The proboscis, the collection of parts that make up a bee's elongated mouthpart, includes the flabellum and glossa, or tongue. The flabellum is the working end of the tongue. Flabellum is the Latin word for fan, which readily describes its shape and to an extent its function. For suction feeding, the flabellum acts like a scoop or wick, directing the nectar into the feeding tube, which opens just above the flabellum. However, if we switch from a drawing to a picture taken with a microscope, that glossa and flabellum are almost shockingly hairy. These structures are absolutely covered in hair. They are also inherently delicate. The flabellum more resembles a delicate feather than anything else. It gets even more complicated if we see the tongue in use. The hairs somewhat stay close to the tongue while the tongue is being extended, but then splay out like a bottle brush once the tongue reaches full extension. This maximizes surface area and liquid retention, so the max amount of liquid is collected with each pass. But with some confidence, we can say these mouth parts weren't built with much intention towards solid feeds. Solid feeds and solid feed issues were historically a relative rarity for bees, barring those colonies with extensive honey store crystallization. That said, this honey, if it does crystallize, usually yields only a partial crystallization, not a rock-hard set. Comparatively, sugar bricks and candies are often very hard set and difficult for the bees to break down. The concern is how the bees use these mouthparts to deal with solid feeds or crystallized honey within the hive. They use these same structures to moisten and abrade away the solid, with the potential for great destruction of their tongue and flabellum. We can expect any damage to greatly hinder this bee's ability to gather nectar as a forager. While we don't think of these winter bees foraging, they are the first bees collecting from the trees in the spring, and their success and longevity directly impact the colony's growth and success at an extremely pivotal time. This concern about solid feeds is a personal concern. I have not seen this reflected in any scholarly articles or studies. With this, I hope you feel confident and prepared to take on feeding when needed this winter. Best wishes to you and yours this holiday season. Good luck and happy beaking.